switch back to the PowerPoint. Are you going to start with this?
Yeah.
So,
It'll be easier for switch.
yeah, sure. So I guess what I'll do is I'll go from my slide deck to this one, and then you can just pull up your PowerPoint here and then just run this.
How do I leave? You're going to be in the other one.
So I'll keep these minimized. So mine will be done. Get rid of that. Just
Do that.
maximize this one right here,
Got it.
and then yours, and just run this slide. There's a little slide icon here. That's probably the easiest way to get to the slideshow. Hey, Rob. Okay.
No, I'm not even gonna. Okay. Do you want me to have slides? No, if you, I'm happy to. I mean, they're ready. They're just.
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Well, I think just the way Val last night made slides, so.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll roll with these two then.
I just thought this was gonna be more of a panel style presentation.
Yeah, so they want us, the podiums here are all marked up, so to capture recordings, so as we go up. Although we have a clicker if you need it for anything, and then there's a little pointer that comes with it too. Why?
How about just a cover page for the slides?
Yeah, if you want, certainly whatever you want. If you need to connect up to your laptop, they've got connections here too. So we'll give it a few more minutes to give people an opportunity to grab some coffee and make their way in. All right, why don't we get started? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the final day of CALIcon. Thank you so much. It's Saturday morning, the second session, so we really appreciate your presence here today. My name is Alexander Ravenel, and I'm with the Chicago Kent College of Law. I'm the Associate Director of the Law Lab, and I also work at the Center for Access to Justice and Technology. And with me today are Professors Rob Blitt and Vojdik from the University of Tennessee College of Law. And we're here today to talk to you about bringing access to justice to the classroom through the A2J Author Course Project. So we want to do a couple things for you today. We want to set up A2J Author, what it is, and how we got it involved with law schools. And then, importantly, I really just want to shine a light on the Human Rights Practicum, which is the course that Professors Blitt and Vojdik teach at the University of Tennessee College of Law. So they'll be providing a case study for their class, which they taught in the fall of 2015. I'll talk to you about how they used A2J Author, what their student groupings were like, what worked and what didn't work. And so we'll want to make sure that we provide that for you today. So why don't we get started? A2J Author starts here at the Justice Gap. I want to make sure that we pause on this briefly because it really does provide the critical impetus for the work that we do in A2J Author. These are a couple of statistics that have been floating around for a while, but I think they're worth highlighting again. So 80% of the civil legal needs of low-income people in the U.S. are met unmet every year. And for one person that is served in an LSC-funded program, LSC is the organization that funds A2J Author. For every one person served in an LSC-funded program, at least one person is turned away. So you can imagine those numbers are staggering. At the LSC's Tech Summit in 2012, they announced a powerful new mission statement, which is to explore the potential of technology to move the U.S. toward providing some form of effective assistance to 100% of people otherwise unable to afford an attorney. So the goal here is not to provide services end-to-end. It is to provide some form of effective assistance, right? Whether it's just getting the foot in the door or in many cases, just providing the critical resources that are necessary to move a case forward. And from that, we get here. Actually, I should take a step back because A2J Author has been around for quite a long time. Since 2005, in its first version, A2J Author has served as a front-end graphical interviewing interface. So it essentially allows someone who does not have an attorney to be able to walk through a legal process in a graphical form with a guide avatar through different steps that hopefully will get them to the courthouse. Now, they won't necessarily get there if, of course, they don't qualify for a particular form or for a particular process, but the goal is there. And we found that this user interface is extremely helpful for contextualizing the process for people who do not have attorneys. So this particular tool has been an immensely powerful tool that has been around for over 10 years now. Basic workflow is like this, right? So you start with your guided interview. It collects all of the information from the end user. All of that information is then, or can be, it doesn't necessarily have to, but typically it goes to a document assembly template, which completes the form, which they can print out and file in court. Impact. So since 2005, over 3 million uses of A2J Author, over 1.8 million documents generated. And those are great numbers, but we could do better. Yes?
A quick question. Mm-hmm. How easy is this to actually run through somebody on their own, and how much computer knowledge do they have to actually do it?
Right, that's a great question.
And you need to repeat it.
So the question is, how easy is it for someone to start using A2J Author, mm-hmm. And then do they need to have a particular technical background in order to use it?
The person who needs it.
Oh, the actual
Just so they
person
don't
who's...
sit there and walk them through.
Right. So once they actually access a guided interview at, for example, a self-help kiosk at a courthouse or through the Law Help Interactive webpage, it's fairly easy to use. They do not have to have a particular technical background, and that's the whole point, is that we want them to be able to just pull up the screen and go through each question. And the questions are designed so that they're only displaying like little bits and pieces of information at a time. So it's really easy to use.
Okay. But I mean, like my grandmother, would she be able to use it if she doesn't know how to use it? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we can do better. Right, but the challenge that we face is one of scale, because we've got many potential forms that are available, but there are not, comparatively, that many content developers. So we had to come up with a way for us to essentially create a force multiplier for content developers. And we landed here, law schools. We figured that students are a good pool of potential content developers because they will want to work with some legal form. They're in law school, so the subject matter is relevant. And also with the advent of technology and new document assembly templates and interactive tools, these are skills that students are going to need to know, they're going to be familiar with as they go into the practice field. So it seems like a match made in heaven. So law schools, here we are. And at Chicago-Kent in 2010, Professor Ron Stout started a class called the Justice and Technology Practicum. It's a 4-credit-hour class. I co-teach in the class, as well as Jessica Frank, who's here in the audience. And this is a class that is sort of a hybrid class, right? It has components of a clinic, it has components of a legal writing class, it has some components of a traditional doctrinal class as well. But some of the critical components of our course include a fieldwork component, so our students have to do some sort of pro bono type work, and the main opportunity for them is to serve as volunteers at the Self-Help Web Center, the Daily Center in Chicago, essentially helping individuals use guided interviews, help them to navigate the courthouse, provide them with any legal information that they may need. Students are also assigned a scope document, which essentially breaks out the scope of their project, which is a document assembly project with a legal aid organization. They have to do a research memo that basically covers the subject matter law for the particular form. A storyboard, which is a really critical assignment for them to do, which is essentially a layout of how the questions are asked within the guided interview, right? Some of our students choose to do this graphically through a flow chart. Some of our students do this through an outline, which they might be more familiar with their law school exams. But the point is that they really need to break down each component of the guided interview into its constituent forms. And that process, as we found, is really critical for our students in developing interviewing skills, which is a critical lawyering skill. Of course, they've got to do the actual development work, so that includes the A2J guided interview, and in years past, the Hot Docs template. Hot Docs is a program that essentially creates it is the document assembly template underlying the guided interview. And then they do a final presentation, and they present their findings to the class. We record them so that the students are familiar with presenting and also being familiar with technology as well. And we found that to be a very beneficial aspect of the class. And so this is our class in a nutshell. As I've said, it's been in place since 2010, and we're continuing in the fall. So we figured with that great start, why not expand that model to other law schools in the country? And so through the assistance of a technology innovation grant from the Legal Services Corporation, Cali and Chicago-Kent helped to start the A2J Author Course Project. So in its first iteration, it was focused mainly on clinics. As you can see here, from the screenshot. It was the clinical course project. But we found after the first iteration that there was interest from other types of courses, whether they were legal writing or more practicum-based classes, or even classes that don't really fall within a nice little box for a course model. So we've expanded it to call it the A2J Author Course Project. The goal is to be able to take A2J Author and transplant it to any class model that you'd like for your class. Our first iteration was from 2012 to 2014, and we are just wrapping up our second iteration, which is from 2014 to 2016, and we have a list of our fine A2J Course Project Fellows up here, 3 of whom are with us today, 2 of whom are my co-presenters, and then we also have Rebecca Trammell from Stetson, who's in the crowd as well. So thank you all for participating in the project. Now I want to briefly pull up a new resource that is helpful for law school courses and to be able to find a project for their class. So I should take a step back. The projects typically come from a legal aid organization. We found that critical match needed to be in place so that students could become familiar with the legal services ecosystem. They could be familiar with communicating with legal aid attorneys. These are all skills that they need to develop, client counseling, even just basic interaction skills with other people. And so we needed that critical piece in place. So sometimes you may have a class who has a prior legal aid contact, right? They've worked with a legal aid organization in the past, they know someone there, they can easily funnel projects to the course. But often, courses will want to use A2J Author, but they won't necessarily have a legal aid partner in mind. They don't know where to start. And so we recently released this new tool called the A2J Project Matching Portal. And essentially creates a sort of marketplace for courses and for legal aids who have document assembly projects that they want to be automated, but they don't know where to go. And then courses that want to have projects available, but they don't know where to go to get them. So if you go to a2jauthor.org/matching, and if you create an account with A2J Author, you can access the matching portal, which is here. Quick instructions for how to sign up, how to post your projects, and if you click through the buttons projects, a list of projects will show up. You add your organization to this list so that we have a profile for the organization. And essentially what happens is somebody finds someone, the contact information is there, they send an email and get the dialogue started. So it's a fairly simple procedure, but it's one that hopefully we hope will generate more collaborations. So that piece is done. I want to get to the meat and potatoes of this presentation, which is a case study of the Human Rights Practicum at the University of Tennessee. So I'm going to hand it off to Professor Vojdik. And I'm going to pull up here actually the complaint form that they used in their class that their students automated. So Professor Vojdik?
We slightly reallocated, so Professor Blitt, Rob's going to go first to sort of explain briefly why we chose to do this and why we chose to work together on it.
Awesome, thanks. Let me just get set up here.
You guys live seeing what I'm doing here? All right, I'm just going to use the Tennessee Human Rights Commission's website as a background because I don't have any slides this morning. Thank you all for being here. My name is Rob Blitt, and together with my colleague Val Vojdik, we co-taught the Human Rights Practicum at the University of Tennessee this past spring. So the division of labor for us today is that I'm going to go over the motivations and the rationales behind selecting this project, and signing up to at least apply for an A2J grant to teach the class. And then I'm going to turn it over to Val, who's going to go over some of her motivations for the class and then dig into how the class went. And then you'll see me again, and I'll talk about challenges, some of the challenges that we faced with the class. And if anyone has any questions at any time, feel free to interrupt. I always welcome questions. I like them a lot. So motivations behind the class, I think a lot of it had to do with, from my perspective at least, timing and kismet. Two really great things, right? At the University of Tennessee, the faculty was doing a lot of talking about experiential learning, building experiential learning opportunities, and I have an interest in technology, even though I'm not really using any today. I do like it, and I enjoy getting my feet wet with it. And then from a personal perspective, I seem to be faced with the chronic challenge of getting students interested in the things that I teach at UT, and those things are international law and human rights, things that don't tend to immediately apply to the local situation in Knoxville and its environs. And then I saw the email from Cali announcing this second round of grants, right, for course projects using the A2J software. And, you know, it hit me like a pile of bricks. This is amazing. Technology, access to justice, human rights, and then we came up with this idea of linking everything back to the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, right? And one of the wonderful things that we discovered on the first day of class was that I think none of our students even knew that there was a Tennessee Human Rights Commission. And so from my perspective, this was a perfect marriage, right? We have the grant from Cali to start getting our feet wet with this technology that's going to help increase access to justice. And as Val will show you, we have a very kind of clunky PDF form that the Tennessee Human Rights Commission uses for its intake. So the idea of automating the Tennessee Human Rights Commission's complaint form or intake form made the human rights connection more immediate, I think, for students. They didn't have to look to The Hague or to some far-flung place to make a connection with human rights norms. It responded to a clear access to justice need in Tennessee. And it also helped us begin the process of developing a new experiential and experiential light, depending on what definition you're using, but experiential project at UT. So I pitched the idea to our former dean, who was incredibly supportive, and then I turned to my colleague Val Vojdik, who was then in the clinic because not only of her interest in human rights, but also because of her clinical experience, to pitch the idea to her, and thankfully she was very supportive of that also. And so we turned to the hard work of the proposal, and after a lot of finger crossing, we got the good news that our proposal had been accepted. So I'm going to say all of that by way of introduction, and I think that's going to mostly cover everything, and I'm going to hand it over to Val, and then I'll see you again, and we'll talk about challenges.
So Rob makes an interesting point, and that's sort of how we came together to teach the class, and I think that's useful for people who are considering faculty at other law schools adapting or creating such a class. We saw this when I was clinic director. I was interested in trying to build alliances between clinical faculty and non-clinical faculty. We have a unitary track at Tennessee, and it's really quite wonderful. But it was a way to sort of leverage the expertise of faculty like Rob, who teaches in the area of human rights, with people like me, who I've also taught employment discrimination and civil rights, but I also have taught in the clinic a lot. So I could bring, sort of pedagogy of experiential learning in this collaboration. So that was part of the reason that I wanted to do it. I'm just going to briefly talk about the form itself, because when you think about it, Rob mentioned the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. So we both pulled up the complaint, and we started to look at it. And if you look at it, even in the very beginning, this is the first page, and even in the first page, even though the questions could be viewed as straightforward on the one hand, look at the first one. It says type of complaint. Check the type you are filing. Now, people probably would understand employment and housing, although they may not understand that under housing, things like being denied a mortgage or a mortgage loan, or working with brokers or realtors are also included in housing discrimination. Public accommodation, those two words, as lawyers, we have a sense of what those mean, but I would bet that the general public would not be able to define what public accommodation is, let alone think about the more complex questions. Does a visit to the dentist count as public accommodation if I'm denied treatment because I'm HIV positive? Title VI, I guarantee you no ordinary citizen would have a clue what Title VI is, and most lawyers don't either. So just from the very beginning, the complaint really, even though it looks straightforward, I think has a lot of complexity to it that would make pro se complainants have a difficult time parsing through it. And Rob and I both saw that, and we both thought, we think we can improve this process for people who are pro se. The guided interview goes step by step. So there's one question per screen, and we had to reorganize the form. You don't just go through the form, you sort of walk the clients, they're not clients, the non-clients, the consumers through these series of questions that then compile the form at the end for them. So we saw this as a very useful addition to the A2J project. I'm just going to go back. Okay, so briefly about our goals. We had 5 basic goals. First, of course, to teach the substantive law of human rights law in Tennessee, and also to locate it, as Rob said, within the larger body of human rights law. How does it relate? How does it interact? So we talked about how much more narrow, for example, the Tennessee law was as compared to the international human rights commissions and law. Second, of course, is to expose the students experientially, not just by reading documents, but experientially to understand what the real gap is in access to justice and how that actually impacts the complainants and people and the goals of the Tennessee law. Also to empower them to think creatively, to use their problem-solving skills and use technology in particular in this project and think about how to bridge that gap. A number of our students were interested in pro bono public interest work and had worked as clerks or interns at a variety of legal aid providers in Tennessee. And they had seen a little bit of this problem with access to justice, but we wanted to drive it home even more clearly. Of course, the guided interview, our goal would be to help assist individuals receive redress for their violations. On a skills basis, we saw this project as developing student skills as lawyers, primarily in interviewing and fact investigation, which we did, which I'll tell you shortly, but also in other skills, as I'll note later, like problem solving, legal writing, working with teams and experts. So there was a development of skills component to this course that I think fits nicely in an experiential program. And last, encourage the students to think critically about the benefits and the limitations of state human rights laws. First, from an access to justice, like Rob said, if you don't know that there's even such a commission, you certainly can't access the law. But secondly, the actual substance of the law. Did it actually provide adequate redress, et cetera? How do I move it forward? Okay, course components. So we included a discussion and classes on the substantive law, on the statute itself, how you file a complaint, what are the grounds for relief, what are the types of remedies available, what is the procedure, how does the complaint fit into the process? So the students learned a lot about that. We involved the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, which I think was a cool component of our class. We had called them and spoken with them before we launched the class to see, would you like this? Would this be helpful? And the executive director was really enthusiastic. She said, we need more complaints. There's a gap in who files complaints. We think this would be a terrific addition. She also points out that the actual human rights commissions around the country meet as administrative agencies. They have national conventions, and she thought that if this worked, she would like to share that with the other statewide commissions and agencies. So we involved them, and we invited her and her staff to come. They came to Knoxville, and they spoke to our class. The students at that point had learned about the process, had looked at the complaint form, so they engaged in a Q&A with the commissioner and her staff, part of developing their interviewing skills, their fact investigation. And they were a great resource as we went through the process. In the end, they reviewed the guided interview and beta tested it and gave us suggestions and comments, which were incredibly helpful. We incorporated, as Ron Staub does, a fact investigation. We asked the students to go around and they were each assigned a different substantive type of complaint, so housing, public accommodation, Title VI, and later we did employment. And they went and they identified advocacy groups, legal aid lawyers, different providers that they thought would be familiar with the clientele, the people who might have those types of complaints, and what some of the barriers were to accessing the Tennessee Human Rights Commission complaint or process. So that was great. They reported, they created journals where they created summaries of the interviews and shared them with the class. It also helped inform them about what were some plain English challenges that clients or complainants might face, and how to sort of look at some of the problems with the complaint as you saw it, and how to address it. So they created the guided interview. In our class, they worked in groups, which was different. Some other A2J projects did one student per complaint. We divided them into groups of 2 or 3. We had 8 students. So one of the things that they had to learn was how to work as a team, how to develop their leadership skills as lawyers, which again are important lawyering skills. They each took responsibility for one portion of the complaint, and then they divided up the common portions, like name of respondent, name of complainant, etc. The Tennessee Human Rights Commission tested it. We created a final product which still needed work, and I think that's been the experience of the other A2J courses. One semester is a very short time. We had a 3-credit class. So in the end, we did have a workable product, but it did have some kinks and bugs in it. And so one of our students took an independent study with Rob in the spring to help iron those out, which worked quite well. Benefits. So my final portion is, what were the benefits? What were the positive outcomes? And we think there were several, and they were substantial. First, from the student's point of view, as I mentioned, a number of critical lawyering skills. I won't repeat the ones I've discussed already, but just to highlight, the needs assessment, I think, was a really interesting skill that most law students don't get. I mean, it was really taking the point of view of, let's look at what the needs of the community are. Let's talk to the administrative agency to get their perspective. Let's talk to legal aid providers and potential advocacy groups like the NAACP, for example, disability rights groups, and get their take on what's working, what's not working. That was helpful, and that was a skill that the students developed. Technology, they definitely enhanced their technological abilities and their ability to use hot docs, which many lawyers do in practice, and as well as the A2J program. We hope that they'll be able to now go out, if they so choose, and do this on a pro bono basis in practice. The problem-solving skills were developed a lot because there were a number of glitches that came up that Rob is going to talk more about. But they had to work together as a team, and if the next time I teach this, I really want to provide them, more concrete guidance on how to work as a team, how to plan to work as a team, because we do group work in law school, but we don't always give our students the tools to actually do that work effectively and be reflective about it. But our students, in the end, they did a reflection paper at the end of the course, and we gave them 5 questions. They had to pick 2. One of them was assess your ability to work in a team. What were the challenges? What strategies did you use? What lessons did you learn? And we got a lot of rich student feedback and thoughtful comments on that point. Some of the challenges they faced and how they dealt with it and how they grew as leaders. That was really wonderful to see. Working with experts, that's another really interesting benefit of this class. The experts they worked with, Alex and Jessica, who are experts in the A2J technology, they learned a lot from that process. And by the way, Alex and Jessica were absolutely fantastic. Rob and I will forever sing their praises, and so will our students who emailed them constantly. They also learned to work with the administrative agency, and they learned a lot from that, right? Because we often teach our students how to litigate and then how to negotiate or do a transactional project. But working with an administrative agency and learning where they're coming from and how they perceive their role and how they implement their role in policy really was an education to our students. Their goal was slightly different than ours. We wanted as many people, they did want a lot of people to apply, but they also are also looking at from their view of having to evaluate the complaints. And we're looking at it from the point of view, I think, more as a lawyer, where we want people to file complaints and recognizing that they may not understand that they do have a legal claim. They may not be able to recognize which facts are important or relevant. And that's what you get in an interview as a lawyer. So the students learned, the different perspectives, and I think that was really fascinating for them. Of course, they developed the awareness of the problems to access to justice. And what I think was striking was that, as I said, a number of our students did do public interest work. So they felt they knew what the issues were. But really, they didn't. They were really pretty astounded by the end of the practicum as to, the vast gap in justice and how this complaint itself could create a barrier. They understood better how to address and use plain English, and that was something that law students don't get. So just teaching them that was an incredibly important skill. They were inspired to develop creative solutions, and I think the problem-solving aspect was really key, that this practicum really taught that and drove that home to them. The last component is public education and awareness. In this A2J interview, there's a function, where a question comes up, but the person who's filling out the form can click a button saying learn more if you include it. And we use that almost on every question we created. What is a public accommodation? And we had our students actually come up with concrete examples of what discrimination in public accommodation would be. You might be shopping at a store and the security guard trails you because you're black and male, right? So we gave concrete examples, and we did that throughout the interview. Tennessee says you can file a claim for discrimination based on religion or creed. I didn't know what they meant by creed, right? So what is creed, right? So that function, I see the A2J form as really performing an important public education and awareness function as well. The Legal Aid of East Tennessee is going to be hosting this on their LHI server, and we hope to go live and by the fall is our goal. And I think that's a workable plan, I hope. If there are no questions, I'll turn it back to Rob to talk about what some of the challenges we faced were and some of the suggestions we have for addressing those.
One of the beautiful things about working with a colleague and co-teaching is that the colleague can pass off the things that they don't want to do to the other colleague. So I'm here to talk about the challenges, and Val's going to keep her hands clean. But we do. I don't mind. And I just want to reiterate that everything that Val just went over is so deeply and profoundly true. I remember one exercise that we did in class where we had the students go out and look at other human rights commissions to see how they were doing their intake and how they were doing their complaints. And not only was there wide variety of practices that they were implementing, but we also, of course, wanted to unpack the statutory basis for the commissions and where they could intervene. And that's a place where we really did highlight for students how precious little, right, jurisdiction the Tennessee Human Rights Commission actually has, right? And obviously, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, and to discover that the statute doesn't cover sexual orientation or gender identity, among other things, was, I think, very eye-opening to the students. So challenges, right? I think just off the bat, we probably bit off more than we could proverbially chew, right? We wanted to accomplish so much with this class, not only on the doctrinal front, but also on the A2J and the technology and the programming front, that in the end, we really didn't manage to successfully do both. We did a lot, right, and I agree with all of the outcomes, but still left with a lingering sense that, gosh, we could have unpacked employment discrimination, and we could have unpacked housing discrimination. We could have unpacked Title VI a lot more on the front end before we started grappling with it in the Learn More bubbles in the guided interview. And on the other hand, right, with the software and the training, and I want to, again, underscore how much insane nonstop work Alex and Jessica did. And our students would be like, I hate that I'm doing this, but I'm going to email them again, right? Because we found ourselves confronted with not only, I guess, kind of like programming questions that were way above our pay grades, but even just managing or working within the software questions that we just couldn't address. So there was a lot, and I think that was exacerbated by the fact that we only met with students once a week. We had a 3-hour set aside once a week. So we would get in there and we'd do our stuff, and then we'd leave, and we'd come back and we'd start the next week, and it was like we're starting over again sometimes. So I think that if anyone is thinking about this, I think you definitely want to have 2 periods during the week built in so that you keep it up front and center on the students' minds. Duration, I mean, ideally, if I could rope students into doing a year-long class and committing to a year-long class where you can actually handle the doctrine on the front end and then prepare for the software and then tackle the guided interview and actually see it to completion, I think that would be really rewarding. And I think that the students got reward out of the class, right? I mean, and I know for many of them, this was the first project that they were doing where there was actually going to be a concrete, tangible work product at the end that isn't just a paper that you submit to your professor and you don't bother picking up the next semester, right? And that's there. We're so close to being there. But I know that they did get that out of it. The teamwork component, Val talked about a lot of the positives around it. I think on the whole it was, but I do think we could have done more on the front end to prepare them for that teamwork experience. I think that for some students it was fairly intense and at times frustrating. But it was also really impressive to see the students that wanted to see this project through to completion and success to actually pick up where they felt that maybe some of their colleagues were slacking. And I guess that's just teamwork. That's sometimes the dynamic of it. So software training and preparation, again, we just had an incredible, endless back-end support from Alex and Jessica. But the students were frustrated. And I think they were frustrated for a number of reasons. There's no Mac support for the HotDoc software. Most of them, I think the majority of them were on Macs. So we found ourselves relocating to a computer lab in the basement of the library for our meetings. And I think that just alienated them from the work, right? And it was like an additional hurdle that they had to overcome. Like I couldn't just work on it on my laptop at home, but I had to go into the library and go work on HotDocs. And I think we were in this software transition with 5 that raised a bunch of issues for our students. Some of them were upset that they wanted to try to do something, but then there was a limitation that they couldn't do it. But again, I think all of that made up for, again, if I haven't said it enough, I want to say it again, Alex and Jessica's amazing, just indefatigable work. It was really incredible. And then I think another thing, I think we were happy with the size of the class. Up front, we decided to take off the employment component because we were worried it was just going to be too much and employment was going to be too complex. I think we made the right decision. I think we could have done more on the front end to generate interest in enrolling in the class and probably doing a better job explaining what it is that we were going to do and how this fit into the bigger kind of national project that Cali was doing and A2J was doing. Yeah. How many students were involved? 8. We had 8. Initially, we had an exchange student from the Netherlands who was just way too overwhelmed. I mean, didn't know anything about U.S. state law or federal law, and we were throwing her into this, and so she stepped out. So we had 7 in the end, and we had 3 were on housing, right, and then 2 on Title VI and 2 on public accommodation. That was the team breakdown.
One semester?
Yeah, just this past spring, January to May. And I mean, I think that's it for my challenges that I'd want to highlight. Val, if you want to come up and do any questions, yeah.
Are you gonna do this again?
You want me to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I think I would definitely do it again. Yes, but right, and the but is a little bit of a longer answer. Like I said, ideally, if I could have it be a year or identify some forms that were going to be less challenging, complex, and substantive. Because again, we were engaging with all of this substantive law, just too much.
And can I just feed off of that,
Yeah.
Rob? Because when you were talking, it occurred to me a number of the A2J courses are not taught as focused on a substantive area. So they're either law and technology or law and access to justice. So we chose to integrate it with a substantive area of the law. And in retrospect, even, maybe we could increase the number of credit hours. I was interested, I didn't realize Ron's class was 4 credits, ours was 3. 4 might have given the students the more time, right, commensurate with the credit. The other thing that you could do, I was thinking, is, I mean, if you're thinking of adding this to the curriculum, you could add it, and we've talked briefly about doing this, add it as an experiential component to a substantive class, so that when I teach civil rights, we could add this as a 1 or 2 credit experiential component for students who wanted to do a forum like this for another state. Or Rob was even talking about an international forum as well. And that way, you would just be focused on the technology aspect and the form aspect and less on the substantive law. We had to make trade-offs, right, toward the end.
Yes.
Because we needed more time. And of course, when you teach any class for the first time, it's all about lessons learned and tweaking it. And so one of the things, we probably should have allocated more time to teaching the technology and required them to do more exercises. I think if you do that and then you add it twice a week, it would really be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But we wound up cutting some of our reading materials that we're looking at critiquing the domestic human rights approach to some of these larger human rights issues. So I just wanted to share that I think this is a flexible type of class that you can either teach as a clinic, a practicum, or as an add-on to a substantive class. You can focus on substance or more on skills and technology. You could teach it as part of a technology and law class as another component, or you could do it as a pro bono project as well.
Questions? Yeah.
Comment that goes with, of course, I've been reading for this entire time. That is the Mac PC divide. Because loves their Macs, but so much that is done at the government level, at the firm level, is on a PC. Actually, it's kind of a good thing that they ran into that problem.
Ready them for the real world.
For the real world. I'm all about the real world.
Yeah.
Just a comment on that. So we found, with respect to our students, certainly well taken that in the practice field, Windows is still dominant. But with our students, I'm going to refresh your drugs.
Yeah,
Sure.
come on
Here.
up.
Yeah, that's why it's a little.
So this is just an add-on to the comment earlier about Windows and Mac. And so we found, and I'm sure that you've also found that a lot of your students do use Macs. And that was a challenge for us too, because as Val and Rob talked about, if they don't have a Windows computer, they've got to go over to the computer lab, which at many schools are starting to go away. And so the great thing about A2J Author 5 and then the new one, 6, that's coming up, is that it's all cloud-based. So if your students have Macs, they can do the actual the guided interview on their personal computers. But there is the remaining challenge of using hot docs as the document assembly underlying template. And that is a challenge too. So one of the things that we had done, similar to Rob and Val, is we had also set up computer kiosks for our students. Luckily, they happen to be close to the offices that Jessica and I occupied, so they could have access to the computers and also access to us as well. But that is a challenge. But the point is well taken that students will have to be familiar with Windows, but we also wanted to be able to meet the students where they were, and a lot of students just love their Macs. Like, you cannot take their Macs away from them. So I think A2J Author 5 and 6 are well positioned to address that need for our students. So.
Yeah, the A2J part we could do on Macs.
Right.
It was the hot docs part.
Yeah, right.
It's that you'll work, that this is just something that will happen, on a
Right.
regular basis. That hot
Right.
docs is not going to change unless it absolutely has to.
It would be tough for hot docs to change. They're not invested in basically what they built is an add-on to Word.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost not, it's not Mac that's the problem, it's Word that's the problem. Even though there's a Word version on the Mac, it's not the same thing, it's a whole different software.
Right.
I did use on my Mac, I can't remember what the Windows emulator was.
Parallels?
Yeah, was it Parallels?
Yeah, parallels.
Yeah.
You can do that, but that's running Windows.
Right, and then, I mean, for the students, there was a significant cost, I can't remember, that we just couldn't do it for them. So again, it just, there's a sense of alienation when you're not able to just, wake up in the morning with your cup of coffee and finish the end of the day with your beer and start working on your hot docs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Further questions? So Rob and Val were very kind in crediting me and Jessica with a lot of the help, but I also want to commend Rob and Val too for sort of taking the plunge and being part of this project, which for many of our faculty, this is a new endeavor for them. It's a new type of class, implementing software that is unfamiliar, and dealing with issues that they otherwise wouldn't necessarily come to deal with in a doctrinal class or a clinic class. So I just want to commend them, and also Rebecca, who's in our audience as well, and then some of our fellows who couldn't be here as well. But they all were immensely helpful throughout this process, because this is an initiative that Cali really cares about. Moving forward is to take this really great piece of software that has done so many good things, has made such a big impact, and then bring it into the law school world. And so thank you all for your participation in the project. Jessica.
And the support's not stopping with the end of the course project. Support resources.
All right. So.
It's being recorded, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the comment that Jessica made was that the support will continue if you continue in the course, and for those teachers that want to also provide a similar course at their law school, the support is there as well. So please do not be deterred. Take the plunge along with Val and Rob and Rebecca.
And has there been any figuring out ways to add law firms into this? Because they do have all the stuff. They do have people who understand the substantive law. And they, as more and more places are making their aspirational goal of pro bono into a you gotta goal of pro bono, is that something that would be interesting to the project?
So the question is, have we thought about ways to incorporate law firms into this project, and also to tie in with some of their pro bono initiatives? And I think it's a great idea. Right now, A2J Author is free to use for legal aid organizations and courts. So the platform wouldn't necessarily be available for law firms to utilize for their own use. But certainly if we could tie in a subject matter expert from a law firm who was doing a pro bono project, then we certainly would love to have them as part of the class, because we do need both. So we need the technical experts in the class, and we also need, critically, the subject matter experts too, so that they can provide the information to the students.
You know, it's interesting, just one last point. I mean, one thing that I've thought about too is bringing in a collaboration from another part of the university, maybe students who are studying computer science or technology and who want to gain credit, something like that, or even a law firm. You just made me think, maybe pair up with a law firm that does do hot docs, that wants to donate its IT person, and our students provide the content in the sense of the guided interview, the storyboard, et cetera. So I think there are multiple ways you could work this collaboratively as well.
And it also it gives some flavor of, again, what it is that you know, you'll be doing
Right.
once you're done.
Right.
Right, absolutely. And that's certainly one of our goals, is that we didn't want this, and speaking for our practicum, we didn't want this to just be an exercise in learning one particular piece of software, right? Obviously, the software is very important to the class. It is a sort of centerpiece for the class as far as the work product. But for us, we also wanted to make sure that our students had those critical lawyering skills as part of the class. So for us, it was pedagogy, it was serving the public, and also equipping our students with the practice-ready skills that they'll need. We also, just to kind of piggyback a little bit on Val's comment, is we would underscore the benefit of meeting with students more frequently. So if you can have, we also have a 1 day a week class, which is extremely helpful for the students to be able to just have a set day to come in. But we also found that we needed to have sort of like office hours with the students, have us, it kind of was fortuitous for us to be in the same location physically as our kiosks for hot docs. But if we didn't have that, it would be much more difficult for students to seek us for assistance. So I really want to just underscore that frequent meetings with your students is going to be tremendously helpful, particularly in the context of a 1 semester class. So, yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the idea of pro bono. If you've got like lawyers, usually the pro bono requirement's gonna be hours or like a real finite amount that people wanna just bang out. Or how do you see them being able to do something in that process, maybe like work with software or anything like that to get the subject matter expertise in a good way on things where
So the question was, how do we deal with the issue of pro bono requirements that are fairly limited to something such as maybe 20 hours? How would we incorporate that time limitation within the body of the project? So any thoughts and comments about that, Robin, Val?
You know, I'm trying to think about thoughts and comments about it. Part of me wants to say I like the idea of the students getting up to speed themselves on stuff, and I almost would be more comfortable with the pro bono component being the assist on the technology side. That said, I really do like the way we set up our class where they went out and conducted interviews. So I don't think that would really rise to the level of pro bono on the subject matter expertise side. That's my just first take on it.
I think another way for us to address that would be to limit the scope of the project itself. So if we had a smaller form, I know that's something that we always have to consider in our class too, is we take stock of the length of the form, and obviously maybe even the length is deceptive too, because as you all saw from the complaint, it didn't seem to be that long, but once you start unpacking it, it was tremendously complex. So I think one of the ways we could address it is to limit the scope of the project to something that's more manageable, and then we can more easily incorporate some of the law firm pro bono expertise within the projects as well. Jessica.
We also have, so some of the classes have experts teaching it, but like in Professor Stubbs' class, there's any form, whatever we can get from the legal aids.
Right, so Jessica's comment was that in our class, we do have a requirement for our students to work with a subject matter expert who necessarily isn't part of our class. And so we communicate with the legal aid organization to ensure that they have someone on staff that can assist our students.
It also helps the student make a connection, tell it to our students, who's like, hey, you might want to practice in North Carolina. Wouldn't this be a great way to
I also wonder when or if this is going to become automated on the forms they have. Now it's time to go through, some tiny legal aid organization that doesn't have any actual forms, that things happen sort of on an ad hoc basis. And really do some interviewing and needs assessment. Okay, this is what you really need to know.
That's a good point. So the comment was about legal aid organizations that don't necessarily have a library of interactive forms available for self-represented individuals. And actually one of our fellows, Allison Carroll, who could not be here, she actually took the initiative on to look for the underlying content that would be overlaid by the guided interview. And so they worked on a set of mediation forms that weren't existing at the time. And so that was sort of an added component to their class. And they sought out project partners like, well, maybe you could use this, or maybe this would be a helpful resource for the clients that you serve. So I think that is a benefit too, in the absence of pre-existing forms, is that the fellows will be able to do their own sort of project management and figure out what's out there. And that's the needs assessment part that Val keyed on earlier. So.
And that's also, where you're really doing the most good is getting, even more people, even to the point that the really not so great to fill in forms.
Right.
Talk about the guide, the book that you're putting together, the ebook to help?
Absolutely. So the final piece of our course project is that we want to take all of the expertise that has been built up over the past year in this latest iteration and put it into a book. And so sometime in the fall, we're shooting for the fall as the publication, the e-publication date for the A2J Author Course Kit book. And the objective of that is to essentially give it to someone who has never heard of A2J Author but has heard somewhat about its capabilities, and give it to them so that they can actually incorporate the class, or incorporate the software into their class for the very first time. There are a lot of materials that are going to go into it, but we see it as sort of an instructive teacher's manual to basically lay out a lot of the considerations that you'll need to take into mind as you think about organizing this class, whether it's what kind of project should I choose, how do I get connected with a legal aid organization, what are the requirements that we're going to need in our school, whether it's a computer lab or whether it's some technical support from support staff, things like that. We want to basically fold those things into the book. And so look out for some news sometime in the fall from Cali with respect to the release of that EPUB. Any final questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you guys. You guys were fantastic. Val, thank you so much. Yeah.
I loved your PowerPoint slides.
Sorry?
Your slides were beautiful.
Thanks. Your slides are also, I love this.
That was scary.
No.
But I recently and a county law that is very interested in moving forward.
Yeah, it's often down,
Yeah, and so, and my husband was a little, yes, I'll make half my salary, why don't we do that? But it's a, but it, and I had just heard about what it was, what it did. I'm sorry, and I was like, well, this is something that, you know. Yes, I'm just going to sit down and work on them or anything like that, so,
I would imagine.
you know, and we're in Georgia where,
Because you
I'm imagining like Tennessee, every county has its own special. So, every county form has its own general form, but then you have that would be a good place for a firm. This way. Oh, yeah, no, I know that they really, they thought, they were like, wow, okay, when can we start doing that?
I'm sure.
I'm here for the next session. I'm going to be like, I'm back.
You know, maybe I don't need it. Okay. Is that problem? Here's the USB. I think we'll just use the podium PC anyhow. No.
Next one?
No.